Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so just for a bit of context, I grew up playing, I live in New Haven in East Sussex on the edge of a biosphere as well. So there's a common link in biospheres here, right where the River Ouse meets the sea, which is one of the rivers in the UK, which is the first to have been endorsed with a right to river charter. Just to give a bit of a background, I grew up playing music, so I'm a cellist from about the age of 7. And so really grew up playing music with other people. And I didn't realize until later on in life how much that physical experience influenced really the way I think about the world. And I came then to study evolutionary and adaptive systems, so kind of complex systems, evolutionary systems, thinking about how entities in the world interact, and from those interactions, how kind of complex systems emerge. And my kind of lived experience of playing music really underpinned, I think, the way I came to think about that. And through studying then evolutionary systems, at the time we thought about, you know, niches where organisms interacted in terms of what food they ate, where they lived, but we didn't think about the sound. We didn't think about the acoustic dimension of those interactions. And so this I found very inspiring. This is kind of in the early 2000s. And then I spent about a decade thinking about how we might take inspiration from ecosystems, from theoretical understandings of ecosystems, to make music, to make art, to make generative and interactive art. And I spent some time in Australia, in Monash, at Monash University in Melbourne, thinking about that and exploring that, and also it's so in generative art and also in experimental instrument making and performance, which I carry on doing on the side a bit today. But about 15 years ago, I did a switch, and I kind of went from thinking about how ecosystems and thinking about ecosystems can inspire how we make music and art, particularly with computers, to thinking about how the tools of, at the time I was teaching music informatics, how the tools of music informatics might help us learn more about ecosystems and more importantly, to protect them, to create new tools for ecological monitoring, which is now called ecoacoustics. So I've kind of done this dance between ecology, music and computing, and I've more recently come back full circle, back to art practice, back to the importance and the power of creative practices, very much inspired by Leia's work as well. And then further to activism and action research, in looking at ways in which sound is so critical to understand, protect and revitalize what we might call ecocultural systems. So that's why I'm now a professor of sonic systems. Lots of people say to me, what is that? Never heard of it. And I honestly made it up because I never quite know which academic department or field I'm in. And to my mind, it makes perfect sense to musicians. This term gives me freedom, if you like. So in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to try and give you a little tour focused on, if some of you have watched, hopefully, the film Satsutaki, and it will be available for you to watch afterwards, really framing this work, but to think about what I mean, or to try to share with you what I mean by this idea of eco-listening and how it relates, and it does relate very closely to the provocations of this seminar series and the concerns of Lisa's wider project, and how this might help us protect, revitalise and regenerate both our living systems and, more importantly, our relationships with those. Okay, so it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind tour. Oh, that's just to locate myself. I live here in New Haven, right where the river meets the sea at the edge of this biosphere. So kind of context broadly, I don't think this will be new to anyone here. There's various thinkers who I respect very strongly, from various different traditions, have come to this idea that actually the root of our contemporary crises are relational, right? And our proposition, I think, which is central to the seminar series, is that in various ways listening can connect. So from the largest planetary scale, if you like, when we started this work, thinking about this back in 2009, the biosphere was the planetary boundary that had been transgressed of those measured the strongest. Sadly, since then, as we've measured more, we've come to realize that we are now human activities are really affecting Earth system functioning to the point that we are transgressing safe limits for life, right? And this is shocking. But the positive news is we are taking various actions to tackle these, both in terms of land use, adoption of circular economies, but yes, various sensible ways of thinking converge on this idea that the roots of our planetary and associated polycrises are relational. Okay, so I think this is an infographic from a blog, which has actually been then taken up by UNESCO, some UNESCO reports, but I think really summarises some of the kind of cosmovisions or shifts in worldviews that we're discussing within this series. So we might think of the kind of post-Enlightenment, Christian dominant Occidental worldview of humans as the centre, having right of dominion over all others as this anthropocentric. An alternative ecocentrism is where humans are seen as part of this wider system. But what we arguably might need to get to now is this idea of seva, which is a Sanskrit word meaning sort of in service of, to be in service of to the larger whole, if you like. We need to kind of give more than we've taken at this point, right? And I'm kind of interested in how sound and listening and musicking broadly imagined can help us with this. I'm going to skip over these really quickly, but I'm happy to share the slides afterwards. These are just some examples of how, from many different perspectives, this vision is shared, right? This is not a new thing. So Gregory Bateson really spoke to us strongly about this idea that the idea that there's humans or all organisms as separate from the environment was just wrong-headed, right? That really what we need to think about scientifically, biologically, as the basis of life is the relationship between the organism and environment. It's the relation that's fundamental, okay? And this is basic biology, right? Basic biology says there is no duality. It's an illusion. We're part of a community of life. It's just illusionary, and this is not new. This is Robin Walker-Mera talks really beautifully about it. That it's our relationship that is broken, and of course this is absolutely basic to the reciprocity that Leah's talking about, and many indigenous worldviews and cosmovisions across the planet, include and also seeds kind of contemporary ecofeminist and new materialist views. This is fundamental to the Andean worldview that we'll come back to later on, who understand Pachamama, Mother Earth, if you like, in our language, as the originator of all life. In line with modern biology, right? It's not, and for this reason, she's respected and honoured, and that these intimate relationships with all creatures merge in unity within the cosmos. So arguably bringing in an element that absolutely exceeds kind of biology. What I would suggest then, and this resonates very closely with Leah's description of listening, is eco-listening is quite simply ways of listening, not only creatively, many ways of listening that help us better appreciate and feel a part of the web of life, if you like. So ecology being oikos, meaning home, the study of ecology being the study of our home, the study of the relationships that make our home. And so eco-listening, very simply, to be honest, the term was coined because I needed to buy URL for a website, and it was one available. Like many things, we come to realize what things mean later on. So a simple description of what I think I mean by that, and now I'll just share a couple of things to frame that in a few different ways, to give an idea of the position. So very crudely put, we might say this is something we do. Well, I think the felt experience of this is primary. we can also, it's something that can also be achieved through science. We often dismiss scientific practice as we critique it in lots of ways, but it's also a route to this appreciation. I think I'm going to skip very quickly then to say that from a science perspective, just because it's useful to have a shared kind of understanding when we talk about listening to soundscapes. What we understand here as the soundscape is, in physical terms, a kind of a set of vibrations in the environment, in the external environment, that is generated by the ongoing activities of being alive by many organisms, right? Finding mates, avoiding predators, exploring your environment, the wind and the rain and the resonant structures of those physical environments. And those sounds come together to create this emergent complex soundscape, which then influences other forms of life. And I'm sharing these ideas just because it's a really simple grounding for multi-species justice in my thinking. And these kind of resonances, if you like, happen across the tree of life. So there's beautiful examples of how vibrations and therefore sound enable organisms to navigate the process of staying alive, right? So the vibration is a physical event, but the process of listening is, of course, always subjective and organism centered according to their needs in the moment, according to what becomes meaningful. Okay, so the sensitivity to vibration emerged 2 billion years ago, I understand, right? It's been with us for a while. So the last eukaryotic ancestor, I understand. And this sound mediates decision making everywhere. So you may be familiar now with this beautiful example that coral polyps, the tiny coral polyps, the larvae of these polyps, navigate through sound. They will home in on reefs, and that can be used as a source of acoustic enrichment to support reef restoration. There's beautiful examples of co-evolution. So thinking again, the importance is the interactions between things. This is one of my favorite examples of a carnivorous plant that's actually not terribly effective, doesn't get all the nutrients it needs from the ground. So it's evolved to exist as an ultrasound reflector that attracts mutualistic bats. These are quite small bats that get a bit cold at night. So the bats come and sleep in the plant, and they're protected by the plant and keep warm. And while they're asleep, they do the odd little poo, and then the poo provides nutrients for the plant. So there's this beautiful mutualism that's mediated by these by the sonic interactions. Similarly, in flowers and insects, we see these interactions not only because of the colors of the flowers, but also because of their shape. They act like little resonant reflectors. And we know now that pollinators, we see through scientific research, that flowers increase their nectar output, so increase the sugar as the pollinators fly past. So they detect the buzz, they detect the vibrations of the pollinators, and they reward the insects for their pollination. So really across the tree of life, these organisms have evolved different sensitivities and sound making capacities to go about the business of staying alive, but really to mediate these interactions, right? So on the one hand, for me, it gives us this very vivid picture of this web, this kind of web of social interactions, which form the kind of biological basis of life, and weave the kind of the interactions which underpin all of this. From a practical scientific perspective, this means because the soundscape is structured, right, it tells us something about, so these interactions structure the soundscape. This means that we can then listen to the soundscape to infer something about the interactions of those species, right? It's like a kind of reverse engineering. So this stethoscope is here, and this is now very familiar to us. Just as doctors have listened to our hearts and our lungs and our intestines, we are now learning to listen to ecosystem health, to sort of eavesdrop. And Leo, as she nodded to very humbly, was really one of the pioneers of using this for river listening and for fresh water, which is now really taken off. And this is now being adopted worldwide, and potentially a really useful tool in the commitment this decade to nature recovery and nature restoration. In Europe, we now have a law that's been passed for nature restoration, similar commitments in the UK. So in practical terms, how we go about this is to put devices out in the field, and then we collect loads of data, and then we do loads of maths. And there's all sorts of open questions here. It's a whole other talk to think about how we do this. There's all sorts of ethical, practical, epistemic questions. Australia and New Zealand in particular are really leading on thinking about the kind of issues around data sovereignty. And there's some important technical advances to be made so that we can federate our models and yeah, assure data sovereignty. It's a whole other other talk that we're not going to touch on today. But for me, this is part of my personal journey. This is how I came to thinking about this world, how I came to thinking about the value of listening to life, if you like, as a way to protect the environment. But some of the first large scale work we did was in the UK and out in Ecuador back in 2015. And I had a real sense of, whilst at one time being in absolute awe of being in these forests, and working with these amazing community, the Warani community welcomed us because they're also concerned, of course, with protecting the forests. But I had this real uncomfortable kind of sense of arrogance, if you like, because I felt like, who am I as a young British woman, young at the time, British woman, to come and see if I can kind of demonstrate this scientific theory with data in these communities with forest people, with forest societies, because surely if we can listen to life, if we can hear the life of the forest, then it's not us with this kind of new technology. It's these communities who live in the forest, live as the forest for thousands of years, who will have this knowledge. And this sort of during this particular trip in 2015, although we spent a couple of months there, we started conversations, but we didn't really gain insight into how that worked for these communities. Some years later, I was running a similar community-led, taking a small part in a community-led conservation project in Bali, a reef restoration project. And there I had a chance to talk to the lead biologist, who was a local fisher. He came from a family of local fishers. And I said to him, what do you think? Is this crazy? This idea that we could listen to the reef? So this was in 2017, before it had really been demonstrated kind of scientifically. But my hunch was, if we can do this, of course, these people will know, right? So I said, what do you think? Do you think this is a crazy idea? And he just looked at me and he said, yeah, I think it's a good idea. When we go night fishing, we put the oar on our ear, and then we hear the crackle of the reef, and then we know where the fish are, right? So for me, that gave some, it was a kind of, in Robin Moore-Camara's language, a kind of braiding, right? There was this kind of, this traditional practice and the kind of scientific theory, both kind of pointed in the same directions, and many artistic practitioners have the same experience, right? So it kind of inspired me to think about the importance of sound in connecting us to, as well as learning about, the environment. So then the next sort of decade, we've been really going back, working in Ecuador and understanding more deeply just how important the soundscape is in keeping together, in weaving together and maintaining the kind of ecocultural webs of life, if you like. So the film that I shared with you is a film that was made as part of an action research project that was led by an ex-PhD student, Paola Moscoso, with her organization Voces del Bosque. It was to support some communities in Ecuador, the Pueblo Ancestral Pueblo Ancestral Quechua, Causac Sacha, so the ancestral Quechua people of the living forest. And it was to support them in an application to their government to recognize their soundscape as biocultural intangible heritage. So Sachotaki means voices and songs of the forest. The Pueblo Ancestral Cossack Sacha live in this is Ecuador, and their location is highlighted on this map. So it's in modern Ecuador, Peru, at the border, and it's located in the Pastaza province in the lower basin of the Kururay, Pinduk, and Yaku rivers. So the Pueblo Ancestral Cossack Sacha are 6 indigenous communities. They're predominantly shamanic. So Cossack Sacha means the living forest. And the living forest contains all beings, right? The spiritual, human, and non-human, of which they're all plants, animals, rivers, and the wind are all seen to have spirits and be interconnected with the humans. So these forests are very well connected, protected and preserved because they have strong land management, natural resource plans implemented through their core ancestral ways. It would take a lifetime to be able to properly explain to you the core ideas there, but the basic idea, there's 3 basic ideas. One of sumac alpa, so alpa being roughly the land, so the conservation of the territory. Sumac cauce, meaning good living, very broadly, and Sacharuni Yacha, which is the ancestral wisdom. So sumac cauce, as opposed to kind of modern capitalism, is the idea, very crudely put, and forgive me, but that no being can be well unless all beings are well, right? So it's a kind of reciprocity between individual society and the territory and all the beings of the territory, including the guardians, the spirit guardians of the forests. So the living forest provides all the energy and air and spiritual sustenance that's needed, and is the source of the ancestral wisdom, and therefore is protected, and the people serve this, right? So there's a very circular relationship. For these communities, the sound is key. So I leave you just for a minute with the sound of Kawsak Sacha and a statement made as part of this application to the government of the importance of the sound. So for all shamanic communities, sound is absolutely central to communication. Then, therefore, not only within each other, between humans and other animals within the territory now, but also with the ancestors. So this action research project was around using very simple walking methods, walking with the women in the chakra, with the men who were hunting in the forest, and they created the film that we shared with you, and also these beautiful illustrations. One member of Voces del Bosque called So Zapato, who's an illustrator, created these to kind of describe, if you like, how sound guides life in the forest. So there's a very nice statement used in campaigns by these communities to say, we're not defending the forest, we are the forest defending itself, if you like. Slightly more poetic in Spanish, but comes across very strongly, and perhaps resonates with those in Australia familiar with Aboriginal indigenous views there. So this project was back in 2020, and the application was successful. So the as we understand, this is the first example of a if you like, multi-species soundscape in our language, the songs of the and the voices of the forest and the people as they interact to be registered as cultural intangible heritage. And the work we're doing now, so it's nice to see this was a visit at Christmas this year. This is myself in the middle, Paula on the left. To my left, on the right of the image, is the current president, Jonathan Grefe of Sacha, and some of the technicians also working with the community. And this was in the government, Indigenous government headquarters in Puyo, and it was nice that the illustrations are on there of the government wall there on their office wall. So one of the key questions now, given the state of the government, is if the communities adopt this recognition, will it act to kind of support their autonomy and their territorial autonomy, or might it undermine it in some way by being a government designation? So some of the ongoing work we're doing is to help them really understand that. I think I'm coming to the end of time, so I'm going to skip very quickly to flag that this incredible privilege to gain some insight into how other communities really value their soundscape as this way to keep the connection between their cosmovision, their territories, their the spirits and the living beings. The importance of this as a kind of reciprocal ongoing dance, if you like, has then really shifted or nurtured and inspired the work that I've done locally, which involves create live streaming and creative installations to try and bring the local ecosystems into the urban environments where I live. I was going to spend a few moments thinking about how some ideas from contemporary Western kind of philosophies and science bring some of these similar ideas for us in the West in terms of dissolving perceived boundaries between ourselves and the world, and also understanding. So I'm just going to flick over them because I'm aware of time, but I'm happy to share the slides in case people are interested. So there's a practice of microphenomenology that we're using in a current project as a way to access the felt dimensions of our experience, in which we find actually this deep intrinsic connections. So a dissolving of the perceived boundaries actually is always already there. And some of the, not new, but still to be fully explored perspectives from cognitive science around the biological basis of living being meaning, and therefore our relationship with the environment is also very, to me, leads us to this position where we see, in fact, that the act of listening, the listener and the listened to, are always already the same, right? And from this perspective, I find it very it's a fresh take on understanding the sense of self in relation to the sense of place, that they're kind of mutually co-constituted, if you like. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to skip straight to these provocations from the seminar series, and hopefully in my rapid tour, some of the ideas and projects that we've been doing collaboratively bring to these questions. Perhaps, yeah, of course we're not alone, right? All beings are present when we music, literally, locally, those that are kind of vibro-sensitive, but more broadly, those that respond to the relationships that create when we music. So I would say that musicking in all forms is inherently already and always about enacting ecological relations, and intellectually, as well as our kind of intuitive and felt experience of the intrinsic relations within the wider webs of life, is maybe not specifically but strongly mediated through sound. So thank you very much for listening. And I'm sorry, one more minute just to say, Nicola, that these projects are not something that I've done personally. They're all collaborative projects with vast, with wonderful human beings, um, Vochistel Bosque, Sachwami, the Pax communities themselves, and ongoing work with the Sarayaku communities as well. So thank you very much for listening.